Welcome to a special edition of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, the Bob Avakian Interviews, premiering on November 3rd, 2022. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
My name is Sansara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the RNL show. This is a show about and for nothing less than an actual revolution, whose aim is the emancipation of humanity, here and all over the world.
At the heart of the RNL show is the work and the leadership of the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, B.A. And this special edition of the RNL show is the first of 3 rare interviews with Bob Avakian. He sat down with Sansara and myself at this moment when the future of humanity hangs in the balance.
So before we get started, if you need Spanish subtitles, go to the settings below. Once again, welcome to the Bob Avakian Interviews on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.
So, Sansara, we've been promising a very special show, and we have it today. We're here with Bob Avakian, and we are just so excited, pleased, and just filled with love to have you on the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. You've been our inspiration and the guide of the show, and now here you are.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to be here. I definitely am very enthusiastic about the show, and I definitely agree that we need to really have the audience for this take off and go to a whole nother level. So I'm very glad to be here.
Excellent. So listen, we're really excited for our audience, and especially new people just learning about the revolution, to get a chance to hear from you directly about why we need a revolution, why this revolution is possible and what this revolution is about, and to get to know you better through this process. So the first question we wanted to ask you takes off from a spoken word piece that you wrote a number of years ago, an incredible spoken word piece called All Played Out. And I want to read the second verse and ask you about it. You write, "This puffed up stuff about the land of the free."
This puffed up stuff about the land of the free and the home of the brave. A country that built itself on bodies of slaves and ruthless genocidal robbery, that spreads its empire through plunder, driving countless people under with its bloody red, white, and blue rag unfurled. All this pompous nonsense about the leader of the free world. That's all laid out.
A country that built itself on bodies of slaves and ruthless genocidal robbery, that spreads its empire through plunder, driving countless people under with its bloody red, white, and blue rag unfurled. All this pompous nonsense about the leader of the free world. That's all played out. So we wanted to ask and give you a chance to talk about, did you always have this view of America? And if not, how did you first come to see this country in this way and its role in the world?
Oh no. I was a very loyal American. You know, I think I said in my memoir that one time I said I felt like getting down on my knees and thanking God that I was born in this great country, unlike all these other unfortunate people all around the world who were, forced to live in other countries. And I remember when I was 16, I think, I went to a baseball game, a Giants baseball game in San Francisco, and of course they play the national anthem before, and so, everybody rose and I got up and I enthusiastically was singing, "Oh, say, can you see," et cetera, et cetera. And when it finished, the woman in front of me turned around and said, "My, you have a beautiful voice." And I just can't help thinking back about the irony of that, But then, as I did learn things, I used to go to the games and this was during the Vietnam War. When they would play the national anthem, I did a different version that someone I knew was part of the movement that I was part of made up, which was, "Oh, Uncle Sam, get out of Vietnam. Get out, get out, get out of Vietnam." So that was a different rendition of the song, and didn't get quite the same response from the people in front of me, but that was a transformation I went through, and it was a lot of different things. I grew up in Berkeley. I was very fortunate to go to a high school. There was only one high school in the entire city, so everybody, of course, went to it. And in those days, there weren't all these Christian fundamentalist schools. There were a few Catholic schools, but mostly everybody went to the high school, public high school. And so you were thrown together with all these people, you know, Latinos, you know, there were a lot of black people, and, you know, some of whom I had known from being in sports competition earlier. And then we got put together, and because I was playing football, I was in gym class with a lot of people who were on the football team who had come from the different middle schools or junior high schools where they were mainly black people. And so this was like, introduced me to a whole different side of America. And, you know, I had a lot of experiences. Some of them are funny to look back on, but they weren't particularly funny at the time. You know, they were kind of hair-raising. But, you know, this was starting me on a different path of learning about what this country is really all about. So that was the start of it.
I have to ask, funny and hair-raising, maybe you could give an example.
Well, you know, when I was in 10th grade, this high school was only 3 years at that time, 10th grade, 11th, and 12th. So when I was in 10th grade, I was in gym class, and at that particular time, our instruction, so to speak, was swimming. And so I was, you know, just standing by the pool, hanging out, and there was this friend of mine, Langston Tabor, who, you know, had come from a different junior high, but then we had some friction when we played sports in junior high, but then we became friends in high school, and he was kind of hanging out behind me, and I'm just minding my own business, and all of a sudden this big dude comes up and he's just looming over me, and he looks at me and he says, "Are you Bob Avakian?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you go to Garfield?" That's the junior high I went to, which was almost all white. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you play basketball?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Did you play against Burbank?" That's where he went. I said, "Yeah." And I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. And he said, "Did you foul me?" And then I had a sense something big was up, you know. And so, but you know, I was kind of naive, so I just kind of straightforwardly said, "Well, I might have. I can't remember something like that." And then he looked at me, and he got this big grin across his face. And I thought it might have lasted like a minute or two. Probably only lasted about 15 seconds. And then he finally just kind of turned and slowly walked away. And after this was over, Langston came running up to me and he said, "Man, you don't know what just happened here." He said, "That's Jack McCrae. He's one of the baddest dudes in the whole school." And I said, "What are you talking about, man?" He said, "He was getting ready to fire on you. He was going to punch you out." I said, "Come on, man." He was smiling. And he laughed and he said, "Yeah. But when he gets that smile on his face, that's when he's going to unload on somebody." But I guess what happened was Jack just kind of looked at it and said, "Oh man, this white boy, he just kind of doesn't get it, so I'm just going to let him slide." So that was kind of a, you know, a thing that made an impression on me, shall we say. You know, it started me thinking about a bunch of stuff, because you realized that this wasn't really just about, you know, the basketball game. There was a lot of tension in that game. In fact, they nearly stopped the game because we had broke out. Fights were just about ready to break out every few minutes. But this was much more like people testing you. You know, like, see where you're coming from. What kind of person are you? You know, how are you going to respond when they put it to you a little bit? You know, because things were going on that were much bigger than me and Jack McCrae. This was the whole time when the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and it also translated into personal relations and just, you know, everyday social relations where, you know, people, especially black people, just weren't putting up with shit the way they had before, you know, and they were feeling the strength of the, you know, gathering movement. And so this was sort of an expression of that, even though it was in a sort of a personal realm. And so, you know, these are the kind of experiences that I had a number of times in high school that kind of, you know, opened me up to more things, should I say.
The other thing that you cited and you sang was "Get Out of Vietnam."
Yeah.
How did that play into your changing view on America?
Well, you see, here's where things are interconnected. Like, as a result of these experiences, I made a lot of friends of different kinds. You know, I ate lunch one semester with some Japanese girls who were, you know, very sharp and smart, but also, you know, a lot of fun. So I learned something about their culture, you know. And then, you know, just going through high school and everything, I really began, as a result of black friends of mine, to get a much better, deeper sense of what it was like to be black in this country and the whole history of it. I mean, not that they gave me history lessons, but just, everyday exchanges of friends, I began, and I really developed a deep anger and hatred about this. And I remember the turning point for me about Vietnam came in 1965, when there was a march, from Selma. And I got up in the morning, and I got the newspaper, and I opened up, and there's this big article about this attack on these civil rights marchers, on the Pettus Bridge. And I was going back and forth about Vietnam. I'd been part of the free speech movement in Berkeley, and most of the leaders, if not all of them, of that movement were against the Vietnam War. But I hadn't made up my mind yet. I respected them a lot. I was influenced by them, but I was doing some study to try to understand it, but I hadn't made up my mind. And I opened up the paper that day, and I looked at it, and these pictures of Selma, and I said to myself, how in the fuck can the rulers of this country be trying to bring freedom to the people in Vietnam when this is what goes on in this country time after time? And, yes, it's in the South, but the leaders of the country as a whole are doing nothing to stop this. How in the hell can they be bringing freedom to the people in Vietnam? And that was it for me. From then on, I was firmly opposed to the Vietnam War.
One other follow-up question I want to ask is, the kind of questioning and transformation that you're describing, I think was going on among a lot of people at that time. And it is so radically different than the culture right now, which is just suffocating with reverence for the US military and its role in the world. And thank you for your service at the ball games, in the basketball, in the airports, in the culture very broadly. And you have stressed that this is something that really needs to be sharply taken on. Why do you think that's so important?
Because you're never going to bring about any kind of fundamental change. And certainly you're not going to bring about a revolution when people are still pledging their allegiance in whatever way to this whole imperialist system, and the dominant imperialists in the world, namely the US, which wreaks tremendous havoc on people all over the world, causing tremendous suffering, as well as being the major destroyer of the environment. And unless people break with that, no kind of really positive change, and certainly not any fundamental revolutionary change, can possibly take place. And with all this, all this bullshit of, thank you for your service, it reflects the fact that, most people, one thing that we talked about Vietnam, one thing that the ruling class of this country summed up after Vietnam was their army was coming apart at the seams. It was no longer a reliable fighting force by the end of the Vietnam War in the early 70s. And, I myself, on the Berkeley campus and more generally, had a lot of exchanges both with veterans who'd been in Vietnam and also with soldiers who were on leave, who were either on their way to Vietnam or coming back from Vietnam, because I usually did a year in Vietnam, as I recall. And, they were turning against the war in greater and greater, and partly, because of the struggle we waged with them, but also mainly because of the larger thing going on. Both what was happening in the war and what they were seeing and what they were being forced to do, the atrocities they were being forced to commit, and also the massive opposition to it around the world, but also of great significance in the US itself. And so, at that time, the ruling class summed up, this was an army where we drafted a lot of people. And they had a lot of people in the army who really didn't want to be there in the first place, and who really identified increasingly with the people who were opposing the war. I mean, just to take the moment here, one of the big things, bullshit things that really angers me is all these ruling class figures who say, all these students and everybody else on the college campuses and these elite campuses, all these kids who opposed to Vietnam, they were all just a bunch of spoiled brats. They didn't have to go to Vietnam because they got a student deferment. And, then all the working class and poor kids had to go and fight in Vietnam. The fact is that the strongest opposition to the Vietnam War was among the poor people, among black people, among Latinos. That's where the strongest opposition was. And even the anti-war movement that I was part of you know, while there were a lot of very large numbers of white middle-class kids and other middle-class kids involved, we were also influenced by people like Stokely Carmichael, you know, and others who were calling out the war as imperialist. So it is just absolute garbage that it was, you know, only these privileged brats who, you know, who opposed the war. But to get back to the point more directly, the ruling class summed up, this is not a good army for us where we draft people, most of whom come from among the ranks of the oppressed, however they thought of it. But objectively, they came from the ranks of the oppressed. And, you know, we were forcing them to fight in these wars. So they went over to an all-volunteer army. So now the compulsion for people to join is, you know, economic. It's not a draft where you go to jail if you don't answer the call to be in the military. And so, you know, you got a tiny percentage of the population that's in the military, and everybody else doesn't have to go, especially the better off people. And so a lot of this is what we call the parasitism of American imperialism, where you're basically feasting off the people of the world. You're at the high point of the end of the food chain, living off of the women in Bangladesh who are slaving away in garment factories, while, by the way, their countries being engulfed by water because of climate change. You know, or the children in the Congo who are mining the minerals that go into cell phones and computers and what have you. You know, we're living, in this country, you're living off of that. No matter what part of the society you're in. Yes, the spoils of this, to put it that way, are very unevenly distributed. But there's still a fact that everybody is getting some of those spoils. And so, you know, the way I look at it is a thank you for your services. Thank you, you're doing this so I don't have to do it and I can live off this parasitism that you're out there slaughtering people to make possible.
You know, you in one of your talks, you quoted a lyric from Stevie Wonder, Superstition. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Superstition ain't the way. And then in Basics, you have this sharp, incredibly important sentence from your book, Away with All Gods, Unchaining the Mind and Radically Changing the World, where you wrote, oppressed people who are unable or unwilling to confront reality as it actually is are condemned to remain enslaved and oppressed. So why is it when you believe in things that don't exist, you suffer?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know exactly what Stevie Wonder had in mind. If he had in mind religion as well as other things, I think he's kind of spiritual in any case. But, you know, the fact is, if you're not actually dealing with reality as it is, then you really don't have a chance to fundamentally change reality. I mean, to actually change reality in any really meaningful way, and especially in a fundamental way, to completely sweep away this whole system and bring into being a much better system, you're dealing with a lot of very complex reality. You know, anybody who's actually ever seriously undertaken a revolution or any kind of, you know, serious change knows that you come up against a lot of complexity. There's a lot of difficulties, and things are constantly changing, and people are constantly changing in the course of events, and without a scientific approach to understand the actual reality that you're up against, you have no chance to actually keep this going forward, and especially toward an actual revolution. And so if you are, you know, oppressed and want to get out of your oppression, but you are believing in unreality, you're believing in gods and supernatural forces, you know, or for that matter, conspiracy theories, whatever it might be, that are totally out of keeping with reality, you have no chance to actually get, you know, where you need to go. And then there's also the fact that it's, you know, if you are looking for, you know, a way out of all this by believing in and relying on forces that don't exist, then you're going to also get very, not only disoriented, but you're going to get demoralized, because this God you're believing in is not going to deliver for you for one simple reason. It's not God's fault, it just doesn't exist. So therefore, there's no way that this non-existent God can deliver for you. So, you know, people believe in this because, you know, for all kinds of reasons, because of death, not their own death so much as, you know, because once you're dead, that's it. But, you know, the death of loved ones, you know, and the loss of loved ones, and sometimes in terrible ways. So it's understandable why people, look to this for some kind of relief when they don't see a way out of all this. But then the other side of the picture, and which is what we have to bring to them as revolutionaries, as people applying a scientific method to understand reality and lead people to transform it, we have to bring that to them. But without that, you just feel like, first of all, the world just seems like, the old Temptations line, ball of confusion. It just seems, a bunch of chaos, and, it doesn't make any sense. And plus, there seem to be these overwhelming forces that you can't possibly deal with. So as long as you're mired in that, look, there are many religious people who take good stands, who, become part of and play important roles in fights against oppression. And that should be appreciated and united with. But to take it all the way where it needs to go, you need to cast off any kind of thing that, any kind of way of approaching things that runs against and takes you away from the actual reality, and especially the deeper reality that you can't see, that isn't right on the surface, but is actually what is driving things. What are the actual underlying relations? For example, capitalism is not just a bunch of people trying to make money. It's got certain dynamics. It's got certain underlying relations in how things are produced and distributed. And at this stage, as I was referring to earlier, this is an international system. Most of the production that produces the goods that people consume in this country is done outside this country, especially in poorer countries of the world where people are viciously exploited. So, there's all this complexity, and you're just not going to be able to make your way through it as long as Stevie Wonder says, as long as you believe in things that don't exist. And religion, look, let's be honest. We can have a respect for people who are religious, who play a good role, take positive stands. When I was doing the dialogue with Cornel West, I said to him, I respect you more than some atheists, because you have atheists who are like just supporters of the system, and who use their atheism for bad purposes. But the fact is that if you cling to that religion, you're only going to be able to go so far, and you're not going to be able to go all the way. And we need to be able to go all the way to get rid of this system, because all the hell that people are put through and the growing dangers from the possibility of war among these nuclear-armed great powers to the destruction of the environment, all that, there's no way you're going to deal with that if you're clinging to things that don't exist.
Just, we've played often on this show, we talk about the importance that you've put on to a scientific approach to reality, and how central that is to people being able to know and change the world. And we've played some incredible things from that very dialogue on the show. But I think it would be really helpful for our audience to hear from you a very basic understanding of what is science and why is it so important, when, particularly at a time when so many people, including among the oppressed, are, oh, science, I'm not going to get vaccinated, I'm not going to do any of this, who knows what this is all about. So I think it's very important for people to understand what it, in its essence, actually is.
Look, science, there's an interview with Ardea Skybreak, Science and Revolution, and she makes a point and emphasizes it. Science is an evidence-based process. You go by you interact with the larger reality. You gather evidence and facts about what that shows, what comes forward, what the evidence is about different phenomena, different parts of reality. And then that's the raw material from which you then look to see what are the patterns in that reality, what might be superficial, what's deeper, what are the underlying causes of it. You have to go to work to do that. And then you analyze that, and then you synthesize it. You draw together the essential things that you can learn from that about the patterns in reality and underlying driving forces in reality. That's what science does in any particular. It's just a way of engaging and learning from reality by applying the method of analyzing what you're learning from interacting with reality, and then drawing together the key things to get to the core, the essence of what that shows. And this is in whether it's medicine or any other physics, biology, archaeology, any other sphere of science. This is what people who are applying the scientific method are doing. And a lot of people these days are anti-scientific and they don't want to hear about science because, well, some things have been really terrible things have been done in, in the sphere of medicine, like the Tuskegee experiment, where they let black people who had syphilis just suffer from it to see what would happen. And there have been other things, of that sort. But Skybreak also makes the point that that's bad science. Mm-hmm. And you can use the good science, the actual scientific method that I was just speaking to actually learn about reality and to refute the bad science. And, some people say, and it's understandable, people say, especially people who are oppressed, well, they've lied to us about everything. They lie to us, about the history of the country. They lie to us about the present reality of the country. They lie to us about how people are treated in this country now. They just lie. So why should we believe anything they say? And the answer to that is you shouldn't believe anything they say, quote unquote, but you should apply the scientific method to actually investigate reality and then do the work to determine what that actually shows. And for example, vaccines. All right, yes, it's true. The ruling class, down through history here in this country and other places, carried out terrible things in the name of science, including medical science. But then if you analyze further, like, do you really think, for example, the ruling class of this country wants total chaos where everybody is so sick that they can't even go to work, that the economy breaks down, that they're weakened in the international arena where they're contending with other imperialists like Russia and China? But more to the point, look at the actual evidence. Millions of people have gotten vaccines. There are almost no serious side effects from all this. Look at the actual evidence. Don't look at what somebody says on the social media. I mean, you can look at it, but then compare it to reality. Mm-hmm. Look at the actual evidence about, that's how or Kyrie Irving and apparently Shaquille O'Neal and some of these other fools talking about how the world is flat. Well, look at the evidence. Is there any evidence to show that the earth is not flat, that it's actually round? There's plenty of scientific evidence. You can look into it yourself and you can determine for yourself what's true. And that's what the scientific method is. And everybody, not just scientists, but everybody, when they're dealing not only with natural phenomena such as hurricanes, are hurricanes, do they occur because God wants to punish America because it's letting gay people have rights? That's what Christian fundamentalists say. Is that the truth? Or do hurricanes happen because a whole bunch of people in Philadelphia sneezed at the same time? Or is there actually some real causes of hurricanes? What are they? Look into it. Determine for yourself what the evidence shows on the basis of actually rationally engaging reality and looking at it and then synthesizing the evidence. Yes, the earth is actually round. I mean, I don't know if he's joking or not, but I read a statement by Shaquille O'Neal where he said, well, I've flown from one part of the world to another and I never tipped over, so how could it be round? I mean, I'm sorry, but first of all, Shaquille O'Neal's a pig anyway, and proud of it. If you don't believe me, go check it out. He brags about how he went on raids with the drug administration and stuck some drug dealer's or alleged drug dealer's face down in the toilet. So, I don't have anything good to say about Shaquille O'Neal to begin with. But this is a world-class level of ignorance to talk about that. I mean, if you put an ant on a basketball and it goes around the basketball, it's not going to flip over, okay? And the same thing is true with the big sphere of the earth compared to a tiny airplane, okay? The airplane goes around like an ant going around a basketball. You're not going to flip over just because it's round, okay? I mean, but don't take my word for it. Go do some work. That's one of the things we talk about in the culture, the lack of curiosity, just laziness. People not really wanting to do, don't want to read a book, don't want to learn about history. Okay, maybe I'm overstating, it's not everybody, but it's way too much a phenomenon in the culture. The lack of curiosity, it's one of the striking things. How are you ever going to bring into being a better world if you're not curious, including about the way the world is and why it's the way it is? So, do some work. This is work anybody can do. Anybody can look into the evidence. Anybody can apply the scientific method to determine what's true. And that's what people need to do. I've said it before. Don't believe anything on faith. But go by the evidence. Go by the scientific method to determine what's actually true, and not what's a bunch of bullshit that some people put out there, to try to mislead you, or because they themselves are misled, and may make you feel good for a little while, but it isn't going to change anything that makes you feel bad.
So you've dedicated your whole life, over decades, to making revolution and emancipating humanity. And I want to talk about revolution. It's a word that people throw around all the time. And people mean radically, very wildly different things when they use it. What is a real revolution, and why is that necessary?
Well, it's not a new variation of Charmin toilet paper. Okay, that's the first thing we can say. It's not a change just in the culture, to be more serious. It means that you actually overthrow the existing system and replace it with a different system. That's what an actual revolution is. And yes, there's a lot of confusion. A lot of people, I remember, after I think it was Parkland shooting, there was big rallies that were held, and one of the students from there, got up to speak at one of these big rallies, and the first thing he said was, "Welcome to the revolution," because there were, large numbers, masses of people there. Well, masses of people are one important ingredient of a revolution. You don't make a revolution with a handful of people. You need, millions of people ultimately to make a revolution. But the question is, what are those people fighting for? What are they aiming for? Are they aiming just to make changes within the existing system, or are they actually recognizing that you cannot bring about the positive resolution of all these different horrors that exist in this country, and we could go through them, but in the world as a whole? You cannot bring about a positive resolution to that, an elimination of all that, within the confines of this system. That is another scientifically determined, evidence-based truth. And so therefore, a revolution means that you overthrow the system in order to, bring into being a completely different foundation in how the economy functions, different relations among people that are not oppressive, a different culture that, instead of reinforcing all this garbage and oppression, actually reinforces emancipating relations among people and emancipating ideas among people, and all the political structures also are transformed in order to serve the further transformation of society, to uproot all the underlying basis for all this exploitation and oppression. That's a revolution. Nothing short of that is an actual revolution.
You also wrote last year a framework and a roadmap for how a real revolution could be wrenched out of the crisis that we are currently living through in this country at this time. The main title of which is Something Terrible or Something Truly Emancipating. And a lot of decent people look out at the world. If they're not sheltering from it and refusing to look, a lot of decent people see the terrible or dimensions of it. They see the looming threat of open inter-imperialist war, even nuclear war, the environmental crisis. They see the rising fascism in this country and the obliteration of really essential rights of the people. And you write about that and you analyze that, but you also see the potential for something truly emancipating. And I wonder if you could, I would like to ask you to talk about, what do you see as the positive potential? What is that?
Well, the positive potential is the other side of everything you just described. In other words, and in particular, the fighting that's going on within the ranks of the ruling class itself, where they cannot resolve their differences in the way that they have held the country together and ruled it for like over 100 years, almost going back to the Civil War. I mean, obviously, in the Civil War, they had an all-out fight between different sections of the ruling class, the slave-owning class and the capitalist class. But since they resolved that, they basically have this procedure. They have elections, the winner takes office, and the losers accept the results of the election. It's the peaceful transfer of power that they're always bragging about, which is the peaceful transfer of power. Let's be real and get down to the real of it. It's the peaceful transfer of power from one section of the ruling class to another section of the ruling class. And these days, one section represented by the Democratic Party and another section represented by the Republican Party. But what's different now is that the Republican Party is made up of people, and it has a social base of people who no longer recognize the legitimacy of that process unless it results in what they want it to result in. And they regard, this is important to understand, they regard whole sections of the people as illegitimate. They regard gay people, trans people, they regard, independent women, ones who are not just, willingly, quote unquote, but not so willingly subordinate to men. Black people, immigrants, Latinos, they regard all those people as illegitimate. And the reason that this base of people out there in the tens of millions actually, for the most part, I think actually believes, because they believe all kinds of nonsense and crazy theories, but I think most of them actually believe that the election in 2020 was illegitimate. And they've been given a rationalization for that the election was stolen, there was massive fraud, et cetera, et cetera. But what's just barely beneath the surface, and the real reason they think that election was illegitimate, was that all these people I just mentioned overwhelmingly voted for someone other than them. And those people are illegitimate in their eyes. Therefore, the election was illegitimate. That's what really going on here. And so why have they come to that position? Because, up until World War II, this was a country where white supremacy was institutionalized, legalized in the law, was supported by all sections of the ruling class. Some may say some words about this or that, but they all were part of its institutionalizing it, where women were in a second-class position, subordinated and oppressed and brutalized in all kinds of ways that there was no legal redress for. You could legally rape your wife throughout the country until at least the 1980s in many states. And forget about any gay rights or trans rights or anything like that. So, that's the way, and it was a country that, while it theoretically had the separation of church and state, was all but officially a Christian nation. I mean, look at the currency and how the government institutions begin with a prayer and so on and so forth. And then, in these people's eyes, along came this evil woman, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, who challenged, prayer in the schools. And things were changing in the country. So the ruling class, through the Supreme Court, made a concession and ruled in her favor. And they said, because we have in the Constitution separation of church and state, therefore you can't have state institutions like public education officially promoting a particular religion or religion in general. So, and if you listen to these Christian fascists, and that's what they are, they're white supremacists, male supremacists, virulently anti-immigrant, patriarchal, misogynist, racist, all this, anti-gay, all the rest of it. If you listen to them, many of them will say, and do say openly, everything in this country went to hell when they threw the God out of the schools. And they're fighting to get, quote unquote, God back into the schools, because the God they're talking about is the God of the Christian Bible, which is, just in its very, deep nature, is a patriarchal document. I mean, you just look at it and read it, and, I've read the whole thing. And it's just patriarchy from beginning to end, from Genesis to Paul, and Jesus too in certain ways. But it's just overall a patriarchal document. And so, once that got undermined, once the state couldn't go, promoting that, these people see this as the unraveling of everything. And it's interesting. Most of them, for a while, wanted to openly be white supremacists. They wanted to openly oppose the civil rights movement, openly, insist on segregation. You look at Jerry Falwell, who founded the Moral Majority, and all the rest of these types like that. Falwell was vigorously opposed to the civil rights movement. But then at a certain point, they realized, well, we're not going to win that fight. And plus, it's a disadvantage to us to keep pushing on that, because the wind is going the other way on that. So what do? They retrenched into patriarchy. Not that they weren't still white supremacists, but in terms of what they brought to the forefront, they were always, misogynistic, patriarchal forces anyway. But then, you know, they brought that to the fore and started making abortion the big question, you know, that made it what it is. You know, the key, you know, concentration of whether women are going to be enslaved or whether they're going to be, you know, be on the road to being emancipated. And they've been fighting, rallying reactionary forces around that as the concentration, along with the kicking of God out of the schools, the concentration of everything that's wrong in this society. And, you know, I've told this story before. Richard Pryor, back in the 70s or whatever, had this routine where he'd say, they're talking about the, you know, these fascist types, these Nazi types, you know, these you know, types that are now the MAGA people, you know. And he said, brothers say they're not afraid of no Nazis. Hey, Mr. Nazi! He said, but if you actually see a real Nazi, you're going to be running fast as you can run. Well, then he went on to say, you got to understand, they got all these people down in the basement, chained up down in the basement. And you don't want to see those people get off the chain and out of the basement, because they are going to come after you, and they're going to come after everything that you hold dear. Well, the fact is, those people are out of the basement and off the chain. We could talk more about why, you know, it gets more, you know, we have to get more into things. But they're out of the basement and off the chain, and they have no intention of going back. So, you know, and then the Republican Party unleashed this base, and now there's this kind of back and forth, or a dialectic, as we say, you know, where the base is imposing necessity on the official politicians to go along with it, and then when the politicians go along with it, then that gives even more encouragement to the base to become even more rabid. And there's no way these people are going to settle for you know, the continuation of limitations, not the ending, just any kind of limitation on white supremacy, male supremacy. You can't have all this gay stuff, all this trans stuff, blah, blah, blah. You know, there's no way they're going to accept any of that, even this impartial and ultimately not that significant concessions. So, you know, they're not going to let a government come to power that is illegitimate in their eyes because it's making concessions to all these things that they think are completely intolerable. And that's why you hear them say, this is war. When do we get to start shooting? All these kind of things. Well, they're not, and you hear the Democrats complaining that the Republicans, you know, are, you know, a threat. You know, even Biden now started to call them semi-fascists. You know, that's about as much as he could go. When they're, you know, just outright blatant and aggressive fascists. You know, white supremacists, male supremacists, all the things I was running down. So the Democrats keep complaining, well, they're not playing by the rules, they're not going by the norms, they're breaking the norms. At the same time, the fascists are openly and aggressively saying, yes, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to break all these norms because these norms are leading this country into a shithole. And, you know, we can't go with that anymore. And so they're not willing to go along with the normal stuff that's been happening. Okay, that's why you could get, besides what's going on in the international arena, with a growing threat, people should wake up, a growing threat of nuclear war, you know, and with the U.S. provoking China, U.S. imperialists, Biden, Nancy Pelosi, provoking China over Taiwan on the one hand and backing Ukraine against, yes, real Russian aggression, but the U.S. is not opposing that because they want to liberate people anywhere. You know, they're the biggest enslavers of people on the entire planet. But what they do want to do, and, you know, the Secretary of Defense openly said they want to weaken Russia. So they're arming and backing and giving intelligence and planning and everything. They're basically using Ukrainian troops to fight Russia at this point, with American and its, you know, NATO allies arming them. This is, and you know, now you got Putin talking about if Russian integrity and territory and the Russian people are threatened, we'll use, he said it twice, we'll use every weapon at our disposal. So that means nuclear weapons. And then the U.S. says, well, if they use even tactical nuclear weapons, there will be a very heavy price to pay, and we've told the Russians what that price will be. What the fuck are they talking about? They're talking about the future and the existence of humanity. With this Russia thing and China thing, you know, and then there's a whole environment which you see what's happening with it. You know, countries, you know, a third of Pakistan underwater, to just cite, you know, and the recent hurricanes, you know, which are worse because of the warming of the oceans and other things. So you know, all this is going on, and there's no way they can put this all together on the terms in which they ruled it for all this time. And that could lead to something, just think about what I was just talking about, something really terrible, but it also provides an opening because all this shakes people awake. I mean, look what happened when they overturned Roe v. Wade and the right to abortion. You know, millions of people who went along thinking, oh, they'll never really do that, and things are okay, and things will work out, got really, shaken down to their toes by what, and people are still extremely upset about this, and these kind of things are going to keep on happening, and this is going to shake people out of the sense that they can just, things are just going to go along the way they always have. They're going to cause people to question things. And then you got the people at the base of society who are always catching hell but are caught up in a lot of bullshit. And life is going to get even worse for them too. And this is where the revolutionaries come in. Because left to itself, all this will go only one way, to something terrible. But this provides a greater objective basis to actually break the hold of this system over people and to win them to see the need to uproot and abolish this whole system and to understand that we can no longer afford to allow these imperialists in this country or others to have the fate of humanity in their hands with the extremely dangerous and increasingly existential threat that poses to human civilization. And among these basic people right at the foundation of society, the people catching the most hell, we can go to them, and we need to go to them and explain to them what's going on in very simple terms, maybe a little shorter than what I just did. But give them a basic understanding of what's going on and what their role can be and needs to be in terms of transforming this terrible situation into an emancipating situation by building up, not going at the system all out right now when all you could do is get crushed, but building up, putting revolution on the map, putting a scientifically based revolution on the map in terms of youth from among the basic people, youth from among the educated, the college educated, but especially the people catching the worst hell, taking the stage, and we can and have to say to them, this is your mission. This is your mission, to put revolution on the map. Not all this garbage that people think is, want to think is the way to go, all this, I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind and dogging down the women and all this bullshit. Put revolution on the map. Put it on the map by standing up against this system. You want to do something that takes heart? Take on this system. Stand up against this system and all of its atrocities and build up the forces of revolution so that we can create the conditions where we can have millions of people ready to go for the whole thing. Similarly to what you see in Iran now. I mean, I don't know where that'll go. You need leadership for it to go to revolution. Our comrades there, the communists, in Iran, the people who've taken up a new communism, they're striving and struggling to win leadership and give leadership in that situation. But that kind of massive upheaval, you have that, and then you have an organized leadership with a scientific method and strategy. Then you can direct all that toward the actual struggle to bring this system down, and you can actually have a basis to defeat and disintegrate what are now very powerful institutions of armed enforcement of this system. It's not where we're at now, but that's the mission that people need to take up. And all these youth in particular who are caught up in going at each other need to turn around, lift their heads, not act in the way the system wants them to act, not act in the way that it tells them is the only thing that they're good for, but act as emancipators of humanity and act to get rid of all the madness that they are put through and people just like them all over the world are put through, which is the reason why they act in such crazy ways, because they don't see a way out of that. And we, with a scientific method and strategy, have to provide them, give them the way out of that, and nothing less than that. On
the homepage of our website, revcom.us, and a quotation from the work you've done on the breakthroughs of the new communism. You said this, and I think it's a theoretical statement, but it's very important in terms of how we approach things. You say that the new communism thoroughly repudiates and is determined to root out of the communist movement the poisonous notion and practice that the ends justifies the means. It's a bedrock principle of the new communism that the means of this movement must flow from and be consistent with the fundamental ends of abolishing all exploitation and oppression through this revolution led on a scientific basis. So I think this is, it's a very important concept. You were talking about the international situation. In basics it says, internationalism, the whole world comes first, not the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. This is an application of this same orientation. But I think it's very important as we're going out that we're coming from that place. It's something you've emphasized a lot, and in terms of what we try to do on this show, and what we want people to be taking out. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this, because it is, I think, a major difference with the new communism, breakthrough actually.
Yeah, well, the revolution we're talking about is a revolution to end all oppression and exploitation, as well as the degradation of the environment everywhere on the earth. It's a revolution. That's why we talk about being emancipators of humanity. It's not a revolution for revenge. But at the same time, we have to recognize that, I was just saying, these youth who've been caught up in all this bad shit and going at each other, killing each other for no good reason, and only reinforcing their own oppression by doing it. Okay, we're talking about winning over those youth to this revolution, and I firmly believe there's a basis for that, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of struggle. And as we are winning them over, Lenin said something like this: you don't make revolution, or you don't even have a new society with people as you would like them to be. You make revolution with people as they are, and then there's a process of people continually transforming themselves as they're transforming the larger world. Okay, that sounds kind of abstract, but let's get right down on the ground and concrete. You win, you win people in general. I mean, we've seen it. When people stand up against oppression, there's a very strong pull to go for revenge. You see it all over the place, and it's understandable. People, look what women have been put through, all this time, and every sphere of society, including just the daily interactions with people, as well as the bigger social relations, and or you look at the white supremacy and the history of that, the almost unbelievably atrocious history of white supremacist violence in this country, by the Ku Klux Klan and by the police and on, by the official institutions of the country. And then on top of that, let's say you go into a neighborhood of like where these basic youth are, they've been killing each other for generations over nothing, really. Over blocks they don't even control when you get right down to it. And somebody was saying all your homies you grew up with have been killed by these other people 2 blocks away. And the same for them. So when people do raise their heads and come into the revolution, they're going to be bringing some of that stuff with them. And that's why you have to have a very firmly grounded scientific leadership which can unleash the fury of oppressed people, women and others, but at the same time can channel and direct it toward the source of all this, the fundamental cause of all this, which is the system itself, and not get sidetracked into going for revenge against people who are not the fundamental source of it. Maybe they're a little bit better off than you. Maybe they did something wrong, they did you wrong some way, sometime in the past. That's not the problem. That's not what created the conditions that you're in. That's not what's causing you to go through hell day after day after day, just trying to make it through life. Someone was talking earlier about, just to be a woman and to walk down the street, any given time, is a trial and it can be a nightmare. And then we know to be on the block and the police coming at you for no reason, shooting you and just because they feel like it, or because you looked at them the wrong way, or you looked the wrong way to them. People going through all this hell. Well, this spontaneous reaction is just to lash out, and even lash out blindly against other people. Maybe somebody in another neighborhood has it better than you. on the other side of town. The fact that they have it better than you is merely an outward expression of the system. It's not the fundamental nature and dynamics of the system. It's not the cause of why things are the way they are. And we got to go after the cause. The cause is the system itself. And what's enforcing this cause, what's keeping this system in place and keeping people subordinated to it and enslaved to it, in fact, is all the institutions of violent repression of this system. So ultimately, if you want to get rid of all this madness that people are put through, you have to get down to the base of it. You have to transform the economic system and all the social relations. But in order to do that, you have to go up against and defeat this stranglehold that these violent institutions have over the people and over society, enforcing the basic economic and political and social relations. That's where we have to direct people. And also, we want to get to a world beyond all this, not just change the faces or the groups of people who are enforcing it and benefiting from it. And this is going to be a tremendous struggle. We need to bring forward masses of people who are catching hell. But we also need to struggle with them and lead them to take up and themselves apply a scientific approach to the problem and to the solution. The problem is the system, the solution is to overthrow the system and bring a radically different and better system into being. And we have to keep our eye on that prize and not go at other people who may have done bad things or may have had it a little bit better off. But by going after them, we're only going to be reinforcing what the system is imposing on people.
To follow up on that, you're talking about looking at the roots of what puts people in the conditions they're in. There's another dimension in what you were speaking to that I was hoping you could speak a little bit further to, which is that people have to be struggled with to think not just about themselves, what happened to me and those immediately around me, and to think about, you've actually called out quite a bit, all the individualism in this society, and to think about humanity as a whole and the larger, more than oneself. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, that's a big problem. Look, everybody is an individual and everybody has individual needs. And, the point is not to ignore that or totally discount it. But there are much bigger things happening in the world that shape what the lives of individuals are all about. Why are you competing with somebody for a job? Why are you, if you're, a student, why are you competing with somebody else to get a grant, a loan? A position in this college instead of that college. Why every time you turn around are you in competition with people? It's because of the nature of the underlying character of the economic system that functions in such a way that you have to do this in order to advance individually. And if you want to change that situation, you have to get to the root of it and get rid of a system that forces people to do this. The white supremacy, the male supremacy, they're built into this system. The very functioning of the system reinforces these things. I was talking just a little while ago about this fascism. Why are there these fascists? Well, the changing character, in large part, the changing character of what's been going on in the economy, for example, has led to situations where a lot of the better paying industrial jobs that a lot of men had are gone, and they're not coming back. That's the nature of the parasitism, the feeding off the rest of the world that characterizes this capitalist imperialist system at this time. There was also changes in the economy and in combination with struggle that opened up a lot of both possibility but also necessity for women to go into the workforce and into things like colleges and so on in much greater numbers than before. And I was talking about this to people a little while ago. Why do you have things like, this incel phenomenon and this, massive pornography and all the rest of it? And no, it is not agency, it's oppression, it's degradation of women as a whole, okay? Why do you have that? It's revenge. It's a form of revenge against the fact that women are not as easily controlled as they were in previous generations. And, a lot of women find themselves in positions where they're not entirely obviously free of all the male supremacy, let's not kid ourselves, but they don't have the same necessity to put up with some of the really outrageous shit that they had to put up with before. They always hated it, but now they find themselves, you know, in a different, maybe better financial position, you know, and there's a whole change in the culture, and they don't feel they have to put up with this stuff. And so, you know, a lot of these incels, you know, they want women to be readily available to provide them with the kind of sex they want whenever they want it. And there are a lot of women that are not going to do that. You know, well, that has to do with underlying changes in the character of the economy ultimately, and which goes hand in hand with changes in the social relations. So, you know, what was the question again?
I was asking about the me, but this is also, it's related, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know, so the problem is, all this that I'm talking about cannot be solved by each individual trying to pursue their individual interests. It's just way too big. You know, the underlying driving forces are just shaping things. Now we're back on the
There
point.
we are.
You know, they're just shaping things in such a way that it's way bigger than any individual. The climate, what's happening with it, is way bigger than any individual. The threat of nuclear war is way bigger than any individual. The mass shooting of black people, Latinos, and Native Americans by police is way bigger than any individual. You know, the constant brutality, you know, even by intimate loved ones against women, the massive rapes, you know, like you talk about college students, and all the women that talk, one of the first things they talk about is, especially in relation to the taking away of the right to abortion, but more generally, is they're all afraid of being raped. That's way bigger than any individual. So you have to think in big terms about how are we going to deal with these big problems that are way bigger than any individual. And in order to determine how you're going to deal with them, you have to look at what's underlying cause of them. What has given rise to these particular things we're talking about? You know, what are all these oppressive relations ultimately rooted in? They're rooted in the nature of the underlying dynamics of the economic system. You know, why, for example, is there massive sex trafficking? You know, on a level beyond, you know, there's always been these kind of horrors, and no, that's not agency either, okay? That's horrific oppression and literal enslavement of the, you know, most horrific kind. But why are millions and millions of women and girls sex trafficked around the world? Why are so many vulnerable to that? You know, it's because of changes that have gone on in the economy, you know, with imperialist domination of agriculture, for example, in the third world to a large extent, way beyond what it was previously. A lot of self-sustaining basic agriculture, say on the, you know, family basis, has been undermined, and people can no longer live that way. And so you've got a tremendous depopulation from the countryside throughout the third world, you know, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. You've got tremendous depopulation of the countryside, and, you know, billions of people, you know, moving into shanty towns surrounding the cities of these countries. I mean, you can look at, you know, Kenya, you can look at Angola, you know, you can look at Brazil, wherever you go. You know, it is now the case that for the first time in the history of humanity, the majority of people live in urban areas. So, but this means that there's been a tremendous depopulation of the countryside. So, you know, people are thrown into these chaotic conditions where they, you know, in these shanty towns where they can't be and aren't integrated into the formal economy. In a lot of these countries, the majority of people are working in the informal economy, you know, just, you know, small-scale trading, or, you know, picking up a job here or there, or illegal activity. And so, you know, if you're a woman coming from the countryside, completely uprooted, you know, and you can't find a way any other way, you are very vulnerable to being tricked or forced into the whole, you know, international sex trafficking. Now, that has to do with the social relations of oppression of women, but what has made it such a mass phenomenon is the underlying changes that have been brought about by the very functioning of the capitalist imperialist system as an international system of exploitation and super exploitation of people in these poorer countries. So, if you just try to, how in the world are you going to solve that? Any of those things I just mentioned, by everybody going for themselves and staying in your lane. As I point out to people, we need to make people aware that staying in your lane will not protect you from being run over by the system. So, these things have to be solved by people recognizing what's going on, getting to the root of it, and then acting collectively to transform all this. And it doesn't mean individuals don't count. Of course they count. But that's in the context of the larger things that are going on.
Well, I think in the course of that answer, you really reinforced the need for people to have some curiosity, to read a book, to understand what's going on beyond themselves, where you began. I wanted to ask you, one thing that really stands out, you've written about and spoken about many times, is that you consider the people of the world, of all nationalities and genders, to be your people. And within that, it really stands out in reading your memoir and reading your other works that Black people in particular and Black culture have played a very important and lasting role in shaping who you are and your ongoing personal and political development from a very young age and over the course of many decades. At the same time, you've never hesitated to struggle with Black people or to call out elements of Black culture if you see them as an obstacle to getting Black people and humanity free. Could you talk a little bit about both sides of that, both the lasting impact that Black people and Black culture have had on shaping who you are, and on why you feel the need to call out bullshit when you see it in the ways that I described?
Yeah, we can go back to bigger things going on in the society. Some of the things I mentioned, with the changes after World War II in the position of Black people, a lot moving to the north, not being chained in quite the same relations of sharecropping as poor farmers in the South under the domination of big landowners and the Ku Klux Klan and all that, with essentially no rights, to a situation in which they came into the urban areas and still being discriminated against, segregated, oppressed, brutalized, but also being in larger numbers together rather than being scattered out across the countryside. And also changes going on in the world where the U.S. is in competition with the Soviet Union, to try to attract all these emerging countries in the third world, for example. And it doesn't look so good if you go around and say, we're the great, we're the leader of the free world, we're the greatest democracy in the world, but we got Black people in America in a situation as bad or worse as South Africa. It doesn't go over so well. So they had to make some concessions. And as a result of, and then you had these veterans, Black people who were in World War II, and they came back and said, we were told we're fighting for democracy. A bunch of us died. A bunch of us got wounded. We went through all this hell, and now they want us to come back and be second-class citizens. Bullshit. We're not putting up with that anymore. So you've got all these things coming together, and it got reflected as in the culture. By the mid-50s. You had, what's sometimes called doo-wop or vocal music, or in the time it was called, rhythm and blues, which is different than the R&B of now, And this had a great influence, not just on me, which it did, but on, millions of middle-class white youth, who were drawn to this culture. And I know in my own personal experience, when I was 13, my older sister was listening to some of this nonsense music, just really boring music that I was listening to. And she came to me and she said, if you want to really listen to some good music, you got to listen to KWBR, which was the Black radio station in Oakland. And it was kind of improbable because, she went to the same junior high I did, which was almost all white. And, they had a yearbook for the graduating seniors. And in her class, when they had all these things, you're familiar with this, most likely to do this and that and so on, and favorite movie, and then they had favorite song. Well, now she graduated, in the 50s from junior high school, an almost all white junior high school, and her senior class voted their favorite song, a song called WPLJ, which stood for White Port and Lemon Juice. WPLJ, it really tastes good to me. Oh, WP, LJ, it really tastes good to me. Well, I went to the store, I opened up the door, said, please, 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 give me some more white port and lemon juice. Oh, well, it's good to me, good, etc. So that was the song that they voted, and that's kind of highly improbable, right? But this would reflected the changing times and circumstances, and then she told me, go listen to KWBR. So I listened to KWBR, and man, I love this music, And then I started, me and some friends of mine, about 6 months later, we went on like a holy pilgrimage down to Oakland to KWBR, It was just an old warehouse, and we walked through the building and we could see the disc jockeys, and it was like a religious experience, it's like just so inspiring, just to be in the presence of where this music was being broadcast. And, and there was a record store in Berkeley where I grew up called Reed's Records. It was down on Sacramento Street, which was the heart of the ghetto. And yes, there was ghetto, and it is a ghetto in Berkeley. And I took the bus. I got on the bus, and where I lived in the Berkeley Hills, and I took the bus down to Sacramento Street and went into Reed's Record, and it went around. It's like, wow, look at all these R&B records here. And I bought a record, but it was like a religious experience again. So, this introduced me to this culture, and I loved it. There was just something that was like liberating about it. And it was reflecting what was going on with black people and the struggle they were, waging in the civil rights movement and the militancy that was beginning to develop. And then, like I said earlier, because I was playing sports, and also, I was in the Glee Club in high school, and there were a lot of black people in the Glee Club. So, because of these things, I got to know a lot of people as friends. And so, this made me aware, like, I you know how it is. I mean, you care about your friends. This is you, And I could see what they were being put through, all the, just horrible things. Like one of my best friends in high school, had a crush on this white girl. And he finally worked up his courage to ask her out. And she said, and I don't even blame her, but, just think how terrible this is. She said, well, I'd like to go out with you, but, my mom and my dad and my friends, and it was, I could just see the life go out of my friend. And this is just maybe it seemed like a small thing, but it captured something much bigger. And, so this all had an influence on me, and I did, as I've said, I came to the point of saying, these are my people. Not that I thought I was the same as them in a literal sense, or that I'd had the same life experiences, but that this is where, this is where I felt at home. And still to this day, this is where I feel most at home. And, but then, as I became more politically conscious, I was aware of much bigger things. I was aware of other people who were going through the same kind of things in this country and then around the world. And, that's when I came to see, well, this is the same kind of oppression. It might be, it might take different particular forms, but it's the same kind of horrors that people are being put through. And this was just, because of the way this had influenced me, this was intolerable to me. And then, I did, for a combination of reasons, I did come in contact very early on with the people in the Black Panther Party. And then this had a big influence on me in terms of turning me in a radical and then a sort of, basic revolutionary direction. I worked in Ramparts magazine with Eldridge Cleaver, so I was talking to him almost every day. And I had met Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, before that, and then I hung around with the early members of the Black Panther Party, Little Bobby Hutton. I guess I could tell a story about Little Bobby Hutton, who was murdered by the police in 1968, the Oakland police. But this was a educational experience for me too. I was hanging out with Eldridge and Little Bobby Hutton, and I had arranged for Bobby Hutton to meet up with a friend of mine to talk about some of these political stuff. And so I said to Bobby, well, did you go see so-and-so? And he said, no, I didn't get around to it. And I said, oh, you punk. And he turned to me and said, punk? And then I just walked out of the room. And Eldridge came to me and said, what did you say to little Bobby? And I said, well, I was just joking around. I called him punk. He said, he wants to shoot you. And he said, you better go do something about this. So I went back in, I said to Bobby, I said, hey man, I'm really sorry. You know, I was just joking around, having fun, but I don't know you well enough to say something like that, so I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And he said, okay. But, you know, this is, you know, when I'm talking earlier about, you know, how people come as they come. Mm-hmm. You know, now just take it out of the personal realm, shooting me wouldn't have been a really revolutionary act. Even though you could see why he was angry, you know, but it wouldn't have been the right thing to do. But also I realized, you know, as I told him, I did not know him well enough to, you know, I just the kind of talk we did among friends. But I realized I did not know him well enough to do that. And so we were able to resolve that. But, you know, from early on, these kind of experiences, not just that was kind of a negative one, but a lot of the positive experience of being around a very, you know, I remember, for example, one of the Forte brothers. There was Reginald and Sherman. I don't remember which one it was. But I remember when Denzel Dow was murdered in North Richmond, you know, black youth in the ghetto of North Richmond was murdered. And was murdered by the Contra Costa sheriffs. That's who patrolled North Richmond because it was an unincorporated area. It wasn't part of the city of Richmond. And so I remember reading in the paper, a bunch of Panthers went with their arms over to the sheriff's department to raise hell about this murder of Denzel Dow. And I read in the newspaper article about it that one of these, you know, sheriffs said to one of the Forte brothers, I don't remember which, are you going to take that shotgun in with you to talk to the sheriffs? And the answer was, righteous on that. Mm-hmm. And I still remember that to this day. You know, and these are kind of like early experiences of, you know, of people that I was interacting with, you know, on a personal level, you know, but also much more importantly, politically. And, you know, this set me in a direction of revolution because that's what they were about. And one thing I will say with I told the story about Bobby Hutton. I don't tell that very often, but, you know, there's something to learn from it. But, you know, in all the interactions that were about politics and, you know, never once did anybody ever say to me, who are you as a white boy or whatever to say anything about the liberation of black people or about revolution or what's going on in the world. That just wasn't the culture. They would say, you're wrong. You know, we had lots of arguments, whether it was Huey. One thing that struck me about Huey Newton and Bobby Seale and Eldridge, even was, well, that's another story about Eldridge liked to smoke a lot of ganja, but that's another story. But, you know, they were always open to arguing, struggling with you. You know, it was never, you know, you don't have anything to say about that because you're not black or whatever. It was like, you know, what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's not true, what's really going on here. And that's a completely different culture than what you got now. And it's a culture we need to get back to in a much more systematic way. You know, everybody pitching in, look, if people are just talking bullshit, they need to be told they're talking bullshit. But if people are trying to figure out what are we going to do to actually change all this madness out here, then they should be engaged no matter who they are on the basis of what they're saying. And does it really get to what the real problem is? Does it really reflect, the actual reality and what to do about it? Or does it not? You know, and that's one of the things that struck me about both the leaders and other Panther members that I knew and interacted with quite frequently was it was always about that. You know, they would say, you're wrong, I don't agree with you, so on and so forth. But never was it, you have no right to speak on that.
Well, you've already taken us to what we wanted to end the first interview with you on the show, and by singing, I think, at least 3 times on this show, which has been great, because what we wanted to do is in 2003, you gave a talk that we call the Revolution Talk, and I don't know, hours into it, all of a sudden you burst into song, a Ry Cooder song, Across the Borderline.
Now my voice is hoarse, but I'm going to give this a try. There's a land, so I've been told.
And then later on, a decade later, I guess the band Outer National took that and put it into a song that we've played many times on the show.
There's a land, so I've been told. Every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline.
And then you've also spoken, see, you've taken a lot of things out from what we said. I just want to make sure everybody sees this. We were just talking before about these are 45 records.
Yeah.
Okay, this is vinyl's not coming back in this form. But look, this is your memoir, From Ike to Mao and Beyond: My Journey from Mainstream America to Revolutionary Communist. But there you are with the record. So, and you just spoke about the influence of the culture, black culture. But we wanted to ask you about this because you've written and talked about how if you don't have a poetic spirit, or at least a poetic side, it's very dangerous for you to lead a Marxist movement or be the leader of a socialist state. This question of the poetic side, and you've written about, including to people of our, who've not had a formal education, the importance of Shakespeare and how you can understand that. You've spoken some already tonight about the influence of black music on you, but poetry, literature, these are things that have had a big influence on you. So we wanted to ask you two things. One, how did this shape you, who you are? And then more, why does it matter to have a poetic spirit to lead a revolution?
Well, you see, you held up that memoir cover, and you see that tells you what at the time I thought looked cool. So, so you can draw your own conclusions about that. What does it reflect about the times and perhaps about me at the time too? But
well, you missed a whole discussion here last night about the Beach Boys and then what happened in the move to black culture and all the developments. But
well, I'm sorry I missed it. Sounds good. Sounds interesting. But to get to your question, look, I think human beings need. This is a point that's been made, but it's important to keep coming back to this. Human beings need to be amazed. That's part of what it means to be human. You get amazed when you see an amazing painting or a cultural performance or something someone does in athletics, and you get a certain joy from being amazed at something, especially in a positive way. And this is one element of it. But more generally, human beings have a need for beauty. And beauty comes in many different forms. It comes in nature. And yes, different people do find different things beautiful, but still there's a need for beauty. It comes in nature, it comes in music, it comes in poetry, it comes in literature generally. It comes in many different forms. A sunset and so on and so forth. If the kind of world we're aiming for is not one where that kind of beauty is discounted or, suppressed, but one where the human being's need for that is given much fuller expression. And a lot of that is suppressed in people. Life is so hard for so many people, and things are so bitter that they don't, and they're scuffling so hard they don't even have the chance to enjoy much beauty, though they do find ways even so. So, the kind of world we're aiming for is a world where the human ability to, appreciate beauty in many different forms would be given much fuller expression. And that links up with the question. There's also beauty in the intellectual realm. Look at this, telescope and what it's showing us about the universe. There's beauty in that. There's wonder in that. Isn't that important for human beings to have a full life? And the same when you're trying to solve a problem, not just a political problem, but trying to understand a phenomenon in nature, and then you finally do understand it. It's a very exhilarating experience. The same is true in literature, like you mentioned Shakespeare. Well, a lot of Shakespeare language is archaic. It means it's outdated. It means language that people all would have understood generally at the time, but not all of it, not even most of it. But some of it is language that we no longer use. Most people don't go around saying forsooth and so on and so forth, and there are other expressions that are even, more abstract to people, unfamiliar to people now. But there's a lot of beauty in the language of Shakespeare. And let's be clear. There are a lot of dead people who are not white who have also created a lot of beauty in the world, and too much of that has been suppressed. But there are also dead white men who have created a lot of beauty, and we should not be prevented from enjoying that as well. And Shakespeare is one of them. The language is beautiful. You know, as I said in my memoir, I enjoy puns. There are all kinds of puns in Shakespeare. Some of them are better than others. But, you know, there are all kinds of humor. You know, there's even malapropisms, which means, you know, misusing or, you know, a word, saying a word wrong, or, like, I remember one, I think it's in Macbeth, the play Macbeth, which, by the way, was a favorite of Huey Newton. He used to quote, Act 5, Scene 5, Macbeth, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in its petty pace from day to day, etc. You know, but earlier in there's a scene where there's this drunken gatekeeper at one of the castles, and he opens the gate and he starts rambling on, and at one point he says, makes a comparison, he says, but comparisons are odorous. Now, it's actually supposed to be comparisons are odious. Odious means hateful. But he's drunk and he does a malapropism. He says, but after all, comparisons are odorous. Means they stink, you know. So, you know, even things like that are, you know, I get a kick out of it. You know, it's funny. You know, it's a good use of a malapropism. You know, it's a good use of language, you know, and distorting language for the purpose of humor. You know, and different people like different poets, you know, modern poetry from the Romantic period. You know, I happen to like Keats as I was growing up. I found the language very evocative. You know, it made me think about a lot of things, and it also just, it created a certain feeling. Beyond just, you know, what it made me think about, created a certain feeling. You know, bright star, were I as steadfast as thou art. You know, just you're looking at a star and saying, okay, this star is, you know, seems to have a lot of constancy. It's there all the time. You know, would that I could be as firm as that. You know, just, you know, things like that, you know, make you think, make you feel. If you don't have an appreciation for that, then when you turn to politics, you're going to tend to be very dogmatic. And you're going to be very dry, and nobody's going to live in any kind of world that you have anything to do with setting the terms of. At least I certainly wouldn't, and I don't think most people would. So this is what I mean when I say, you know, you don't have to write poetry. That's not my point. But, you know, you have to have an appreciation for beauty in all these different kinds of ways, or else you're not aiming for the kind of society that we need to be aiming for, where human beings can really thrive in the fullest way and in the fullest dimensions.
Well, we want to thank you for this first installment of interviews with Bob Avakian on the Revolution Nothing Less show. It's really been important. It's been fun.
It's been a thrill.
A thrill. It's been
thrill
melodic. And we're looking forward to
continue. At least we hope so.
Okay, so thank you once again.
Well, I appreciate being able to do this. And I think it's very important what's being done with this show.
That was just the first of 3 interviews that Sansara and I did with Bob Avakian. They each go to different and sometimes surprising places. As a whole, there's nothing else like it. As you process what you've just seen, think hard of the difference it will make for people everywhere to see this interview, to experience Bob Avakian up close, the heart and soul that leads him to fight hard for a real, emancipating revolution.
Think of the difference it would make if hundreds of thousands, even millions of people could learn over the next weeks and months that we have this leader. This is a moment with the future at stake. Getting these interviews known far and wide requires money, lots of it. Mass advertising on the internet and on the streets to break this into places where people have not yet heard of this leader or this show. Posters, palm cards by the hundreds of thousands will bring this right to where people live and work. Funds are needed to produce these interviews and the ongoing work we do here at the Revolution Nothing Less show. And this only happens with your support. We want to ask you to sign up today to make a recurring monthly donation at patreon.com/therevcoms. Give $50, $25, or even $3 a month. Make a generous one-time donation by going to revcom.us/donate. We urge you to come back for all 3 interviews and then watch and spread this, the Revolution Nothing Less show, every week. Donate generously.